right, wonderful. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Back and everything? Great. Okay, so welcome to the Student-Prof Debate of 2013. I'm assuming we all know the resolution by now, but if not, here it is again. Be it resolved that arts and science students are useless. So, the debaters are... Thank you. Debaters are as follows. On the side of the professors, we have Hartley Jafine and Dr. Howard Jones. And then on the student side, we have Erik Brown and Sam Godfrey, who will be arguing against. And other than that, I'm Chris Leckenby. I'll be moderating. So the...
Mr. President.
Okay, so the debate format will be as follows. Each side will have 8 minutes of opening speeches to be divided between the two, however they want. After that, there will be 2 rounds of 5-minute rebuttals for each side. So a total of 20 minutes. We'll go 5, 5, 5, 5. Again, that'll be divided however they want. After that, the floor will be open to 15 minutes of what we'll term freestyle debating. Now, the format to that is still kind of open. The essence is that anybody can jump in at any time. So the idea is that most of the attention will be devolved on what you guys have to say. If participation is really good, I will move to a speakers list. And if there's time at the end, we will also open it up to the audience, say for the last 2-3 minutes. So if anybody has questions you want to address to any of the debaters, any of the arguments, then we will do that. Then once that 15 minutes is up, we will have 5 minutes of closing arguments for each side. So since the professors are arguing for the resolution, we will start with them. So I turn it over to you. I will be timing, you'll be using this one.
Well, Madam Moderator, friends on the other side, colleagues and guests. Let me say at the outset that my colleague Jafine and I take no pleasure whatsoever in coming before this audience to propose that arts and science students are useless. It would have been easier, probably safer, to have chosen the other side. But we have sacrificed pleasure to duty. For we believe that when there are those who are inflicted with a disease, it is incumbent upon people of goodwill, as of course we are, to come to their aid, even at the risk of incurring unpopularity in the process, saying things which are difficult to say and difficult to hear. But let us make no mistake. It is a disease that we are talking about, and an insidious one. For it is a disease without pain. Indeed, in a perverse way, it can give a degree of pleasure, even as it harms. Now, we do not pretend, do we? To be able to effect a cure this evening. For the present, we can hope only to persuade its unfortunate victims to take that first vital step towards recovery. And that first step, the most difficult step, is for them to acknowledge that the disease is present. Now, in making this our priority, we are following an approved procedure. The great teacher Socrates, when he endeavored to advance someone in knowledge, began always by inducing them to admit first that they were totally ignorant. It was a method that did not make Socrates popular. In a comic play of the time, his house was burned to the ground. In real life, the people of Athens put Socrates to death. Similarly, the monk Peter Damian in the 11th century, when he perceived that his fellow monks were beginning to pay more attention to their bodies than their souls, felt constrained to remind them in brutal tones who they were. To remind them that they were nothing more than pus, slime, decay, excrement, putrefaction, stinking filth, and foul corruption. It need not be said that Damien was not the flavour of the month around here. So, on this side, we are prepared to take upon ourselves the opprobrium that will inevitably attend our declaration that arts and science students are, not to put too fine a point upon it, absolutely, entirely, and totally useless.
Useless.
But what are the symptoms of this disease? Sadly, it is not a new phenomenon. Socrates' pupil, Plato, describes it well in his Republic, where, as you well know, he divides society into three categories. The indispensable, i.e. the philosopher king, i.e. himself. The useful, doctors, soldiers, cooks, winemakers, more winemakers, more cooks, and so forth. And thirdly, the useless, a category which includes, amongst others, other philosophers. Anyone called Nigel. And here I quote, "And those who learn a little of this, a little of that, but not enough of anything to make a useful contribution to the common weal." The dibberers, the dabblers, the dilettanti, the waverers, the vacillators, the timid, who are forever paralyzed by an inability to commit themselves to a single goal, except that of keeping their options open. Of being neither fish nor fowl, so that like Shakespeare's Richard, they are deformed, unfinished, sent out into the breathing world, scarce half made up. In a word, useless.
Useless.
Now, our friends on the other side will tell you, no doubt, that this is a false picture of the arts side. They may parade before you a number of examples drawn from history, from mythology, from wherever they can find them. Examples of that they will argue prove the contrary. Leonardo da Vinci, a genius of many parts. Sir William Herschel, astronomer, composer of symphonies. They may even go back to the 8th century and drag forth Valdric the Unbearable and her twin sister Erik. Who presided over a thriving real estate empire, ran a string of health spas and fashion boutiques, and finished med school part-time. But these examples will not do. They are notable not because they are typical of the art side culture, but because they are exceptions. Exceptions that prove the rule. And the rule is simple enough. The art-size syndrome, a smattering of this, a smidgen of that, a commitment to nothing, is not a recipe for achievement, but a platform for perfecting the art and science of being useless.
Dr. Jones, you've passed the 8-minute mark, so you've passed the 8-minute mark.
Have I indeed?
Yes, you have. That would be most appreciated.
Yes. Right. But there will be later.
Okay, Sam, Erik, do 8 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to do 5.5. Sam's going to do 2.5. This is benefit. Well, when I finish, Chris, if you would stop the time so that Sam can get up here.
I talked too fast.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah.
Wasting time.
I'm preparing myself. I've got a lot of work to do. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, at first glance, it seems that Sam and I have a fairly easy job before us tonight. We basically have to convince you all that you're not completely wasting 4 years of your life and that you have some intrinsic value. I know we're sort of preaching to the choir here, but we're going to try and make it as interesting as possible. I'd like to forewarn all the upper years here, unlike last year's group, we don't have many raunchy sexual jokes prepared. But not to worry, we'll try and throw some in throughout the debate, and I know if I can entertain you, Sam certainly will. She's just generally a lot more interesting of a person than I am. I'm going to be talking about two things today. First, I want to talk about the problem with objectively defining uselessness and why we think this undermines professors' case. And then I want to talk about the importance of the modern-day polymath, particularly with what regards Dr. Jones was talking about. And then later on, Sam's going to talk about the intangible contribution we think arts and science students make and why it's wrong to disregard that. So my first point, dealing with the problem with objectively defining uselessness. Recognize, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think, in a practical sense, that we define the usefulness of an object, of a concept, or of a tool based on some sort of objective standard. In fact, we do the exact opposite. We define it based on a subjective standard, based particularly on the predetermined purpose of that object. And let's just give a kind of an arbitrary example. Bear with me here. A whip. Now recognize, ladies and gentlemen, within the context of herding cattle, a whip is considered useful because one of its predetermined purposes is to aid in the raising of that livestock. But at the same time, we don't think you would say a whip is very useful as a contraceptive, for example. In fact, for a select group of people, it helps in serving the exact opposite. But we won't go there. Note, though, if you feel that you are part of this group and want to stay safe, see Sam after the debate. So what are we saying here? We're saying because the purpose, or the usefulness of an object is reliant upon why it was created in the first place, we don't think the professors can arbitrarily stand up here and say arts and science students are useless. Frankly, we're not Calvinists. I don't think you are either. And we don't think arts and science students or humans in general can be just designated a purpose to begin with. We think it's better to recognize that usefulness is subjective, and that's why we think their point falls. But for all intents and purposes, let's assume that there's an objective definition. We think in order to come with one, you have to kind of take a utilitarian stance. Are arts and science students providing the greatest good for the greatest number? And we think on that basis, we still win this case. For all of you in second year, you're quite familiar with Daniel Bell by now. And you're quite familiar particularly with his philosophy about the importance of specialists. More people that know more about less. Scientists, mathematicians, medical people of some sort. You get the idea. And we would agree that in today's technocratic society, specialists are important. But at the same time, we think there is still room for the intellectual, for the modern day polymath, as it were. And we think that arts and science students are a good example of this. They are able to connect and build bridges between specific areas of knowledge. And we think by building those bridges, they can unify theories and bring them forward into actually like forwarding human goals and human aspirations. Right? We think arts and science students have three qualities that give them this power, essentially. First, we think obviously they can see both sides of the equation, the arts and the sciences. We're all familiar with that. Second, we think they have critical thinking skills. We like to all think we're pretty smart in that way. Third of all, we think they can see the big picture. We can remember inquiry and hearing it all the time, see the big picture, cover all the angles. We think we're particularly good at that. And arts and science students apply these things every single day on and off campus. We give you the example of the MSU presidency. Congratulations to David, by the way, on winning the election. We think that David, he'd probably agree with us in saying that the skills he's learned in arts side will help him fulfill his job next year, which by definition is to unite specific areas of knowledge. People, regardless of what their program is, or what their political ideology might be, in order to pursue some common goal for the university, we think that's pretty valuable. Second, we give you the example of the Silhouette, which is an institution, let's be honest, that is arts side dominated. And we think the Silhouette as a newspaper, its job, again, is to unite specific ideology, to bring together viewpoints, to take specific knowledge into one form that everybody can understand, that can be used, that can be applied. We think arts sides are very useful in that respect. But even off of campus, we think there are inherent examples of arts sides that have done this, that have actually united knowledge in a really good way. And we give you the example of Dr. Samantha Nutt. Yes, she has specific knowledge in medical science, but we think at the same time she's been able to fuse that with essentially what we learn in first-year inquiry, to form War Child and to pursue good things around the world. We think Dr. Samantha Nutt is pretty useful, ladies and gentlemen, and we think every arts and science student has the potential to achieve the sort of feats that she's achieved because they have those fundamental skills, because they recognize the big picture and they can apply that in every way, shape, and form. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm going to pass the torch on to Samantha.
Okay, thanks for this. Erik handled the professional part of this debate. Going to be moving on to something that's a little harder. Well, okay, it's not harder to do, but it's kind of what I'm all about. We're going to be talking about happiness. So, I think that there's a lot about art side that promotes happiness. First of all, we have our community. I think there's a lot of strong emphasis on community going here. Even if, well, hopefully all of you feel somewhat connected to the art side community since you're at the Student-Prof Debate. But even coming into the program, part of the drive of our program is that we're so small. So wanting to go into art side, you have some sense that community is important to you. So even if you're not a part of this one, I bet there's another one that you are a part of. I'm sure you are. And that it's important to you to feel that support. And since it's important to you to feel supported, I think that you're more likely to support other people too. And that's just great. And that's really useful, guys. Additionally, something Erik had touched on before was the fact that we're in the habit of looking at things from multiple angles. So we're in the habit of looking at the arts and then looking at the sciences, obviously. And I think this transcends the academic into our relationships. So we're more likely to maybe try to look at something from the opposite perspective, or not the opposite, but the other person's perspective as well. So when we act, we're doing it hopefully empathetically, or at least sympathetically. And when we make decisions based on everybody in the situation, that benefits everybody. And when you're lovely and kind, people are happy. And I would argue that happiness is useful. But you don't have to agree with me. I mean, there are other people, more reputable people, definitely more reputable people that you can trust on this one. We have John Stuart Mill, who is one of the founders of utilitarianism. And I would say that when we're talking about usefulness, it would be a little bit rude not to bring him into this. His definition of use was pleasure, and happiness is pleasure. So right there. Additionally, I would argue that when you're happier, you're useful in other ways. You're going to be healthier, and you're going to be more productive. Like Henry Ford, who gave his workers extra money, even though it hurt him a little bit, but the productivity boosted, and it was good for him in the long run. Extra useful. So what we've done today is we've shown you that usefulness is arguably impossible to define. But even if it is, we've got a case. So we've got the tangible and the intangible. And if still you're out there and you're saying, okay, no, well, at least our rambling is making you feel better about yourselves.
Thank you, Sam. That's actually perfect timing.
Thank you.
All right, so now we'll turn back over to the props.
Human timers, we are very useful.
Good evening, folks. So I think what Erik and Sam have spoken about, their thoughts, their notions, I think further proves the point that arts and science students are useless. Unlike my colleague, Dr. Jones, I in fact take great pleasure. Just to rebut a few comments that were made in the past 8 minutes, which, while excellently timed, were a bit flawed. You discuss how, Erik, there is no objective standard of usefulness. I might be inclined to agree with that. However, if we look at uselessness as subjective, I would say that arts and science students are subjective in every way useless, no matter how you slice it. So if you look at it one way, useless. Another way, useless. So maybe there is an objective uselessness, but in every sense of the word, in every possible world that exists, uselessness permeates the art science culture. Now, you discuss how the one advantage that you have of being both arts and science gives you the advantage to view things from multiple perspectives, multiple lenses. But let me explain what happens in meetings like that. You go round and round in circles. You say, this is the scientific perspective, this is the art perspective. But what about the scientific perspective? But what about the artistic perspective? But what about science? Art, science, art, you go round and nothing ever gets done, folks. You get dizzy thinking about it. You talk about Henry Ford, who gives money to his workers, and even though it hurt him his bottom line, he was able to make his employees happy. By a show of hands, who here wants to invest in Ford cars for the moment? I mean, I think the decline of the auto industry speaks for itself in terms of, yes, maybe short-term his employees were happy, but long-term he's doing more damage, more harm than good. I think further proving the point that, I mean, the fact that happiness is good, I mean, let's look at happiness generally. Smiling. What does this get you? Smiling is not productive. Smiling, I can sit at my desk and smile. It's not going to get my work done. You know what is going to get my work done? Working. See, exactly. So, this is exactly this. You're caught up in this idea that happiness will provide some sort of usefulness. But happiness does not provide usefulness. In fact, it's just a waste of time. And I think further shows how useless arts and science students are. Now, you guys talk about how you have skills that you can apply in today's world. Critical thinking. But you'd be surprised to know that this is not where the job market is. The skills that need to be learned in the 21st century are all about pie eating, how to sing underwater, and the bottom lip smile. These are things that need to be worked on and perfected while you are busy learning critical thinking, how to write, how to read. Useless. Just like you.
Oh wait, they go?
I take it, Hartley, that's all your site has to say for this 5 minutes. You were under time.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
I don't like to waste time if I don't need to.
Use all of our time. I'm just throwing words out there.
Sam, you have 5 minutes.
No, go for it. You can.
You want to go?
Yeah.
Okay, well then I'll go.
Collaboration.
You can't even rouse the crowd. Kitty rousing. Kitty rousing.
I can rest upon my logic and not my emotional appeal. In order Ladies and gentlemen, every morning I walk into Student-Prof. I catch a glimpse of Steve working on a project. I see Chris talking about something relevant and interesting. I hug Pavan, and I think, wow, this program really turns me on. It's true. It's true, and I'm sure some of you agree with me. Probably, well, we go both ways. Most of you agree. But inevitably there are going to be some of you that don't, that walk into Student-Prof, see me, and just, you know, like every ounce of sexual desire leaves your body. That's understandable, but it's still subjective. And we would say, in my case, in those of you who actually get turned on by people like me, raise your hands. For those of you that actually get turned on by people like me, right, and Sam, of course, more like Sam than me, for sure. For people that actually get turned on by people like us, it's subjective, but you get value out of it. There's inherent value to having that sort of arousal, right? It provides happiness. It provides self-fulfillment. It allows you to provide yourself with self-fulfillment. So anyway, in any way, shape, or form, there is an inherent value that comes out of it. It's still subjective, but there is still inherent value. For Hartley to stand up here and say, well, every form of subjective value or usefulness is useless, I think is really like impossible to prove. We think it's much more reasonable to believe that there is subjective usefulness, like for instance as Sam talked about. Julia is friends with Sam. Sam's a positive person. We think her positiveness and kind of her inclusiveness and her social ability, which we think is kind of nurtured in the Art Sci program, we think that benefits her social relationships. Hence, Julia feels better, and she goes and sees meets somebody in a crowd, and they feel better about themselves, and it spreads. We think there's an inherent social good to that, right? People feel happier. Yes, happiness doesn't get work done, but we would actually contend that it does. I mean, happy people are more productive people, we would argue. But anyway, at the end of the day, we think, even though it's very difficult for the opposition or the government, mind you, to stand up here and just make that claim without any evidence, right? Okay, then Hartley talked about, well, you go back and forth in circles, and that's a bad thing. Well, we think no. If you've looked at Parliament any time lately, they go back and forth all the time. But we think that's better than a dictatorship. That's better than just science or just the dictatorship of science or the dictatorship of arts. We think it's better to have both and come to sort of like one reasonable decision that takes a little bit longer than one quick decision, which might not be as reasonable, might not be as well thought out. Okay, and then Hartley basically tried to tell you what are valuable skills in today's society, right? Apparently I need to know how to sing underwater now to get a job. Well, okay, we'll concede that those are valuable skills. I think it'd be pretty cool to sing underwater, and then I could do like the Harlem Shake thing. Well, they don't sing in that, but I'm sort of naive when it comes to viral videos. Anyway,
I would say useless.
Sure, I'm useless in that regard. That doesn't mean I'm useless in every regard, which is essentially what you're implying in this resolution. And we think that's the problem. I mean, I can be in the arts and science program and then go, and Andrew and I could go practice in the pond singing underwater. We don't think being in the arts sci program negates from these valuable skills.
It's
right?
a date.
It's a date. There you go. After this, we'll jump in cruise. Yeah, so we think there's a real inherent problem with just saying, well, the arts and science program doesn't allow for these skills. Well, we think you can still pursue those valuable skills outside of the program. It doesn't detract from the usefulness of the program. Okay, finally I want to sort of deal in my last 30 seconds here with what Dr. Jones talked about, a little bit at least, where he talked about basically how we're a deformed disease that's corrupting us arts and science students. We think Okay, we're a little weird at times. Maybe that's a disease. Maybe that's a disease. I tend to get like a little tired and drowsy in physics tutorial. Maybe that's a disease. But we don't think that that necessarily takes away from our ability to contribute to society to a certain regard. We think diseased people can still contribute, and they do. We talked about the value of polymath in society. We told you that there is still an inherent place for these sorts of people. We didn't hear a response from that. And on that basis, I'm going to turn it over to Sam to continue our fabulous.
You're up.
5 minutes?
5 minutes is up.
Oh, okay, never mind. We're done.
Hartley, you can do 5.
Thank you. Where to begin? So, Erik, you were talking about how when you enter C105, things happen with your body. Here's the thing. As you were talking about these things, you could see the cringes on the face of the audience, which to me says that they do not fully support the words you speak.
They're embarrassed to admit it.
That's one way to look at it. But let's look at another view. The fact that you've decided to go to arousal and sexualization shows the baseness that you're willing to go to win this debate. Dr. Jones and I are keeping it classy. We aren't going to talk about our sexuality. At least I think we're not.
Or whips.
Or whips. I know 50 Shades.
Or arousal.
No, absolutely. No, I know that 50 Shades of Grey is big now, but we're not going to go there because this is not what we're about.
Or contraceptives.
We're going to keep this class. I'm wearing a tie. That's automatically classic. I don't see a tie on you. Yeah. But you talk about how you use Parliament as an example to counter what I was talking about, how dictatorship is bad. That's
You hear it.
right. Once again, you can't even rouse the crowd. So, dictatorships are seemingly bad, but they can produce amazing things. For example, if we look at some dictatorships, we can say that while they might not be in the best interest of their citizens, they are useful because they get things done. Now, I understand that democracy is great, and in this arts and sci hippy-dippy world, we can posit that. But nothing gets done. And you use the example of Parliament. Parliament is so incredibly slow. So slow. Yay! So how is slow useful? If you're tying your shoes in the morning, do you want to be quick or do you want to be slow? I think you want to be quick. Otherwise, you're going to be late for class. And if you're late for class, well, you're going to miss the material, you're not going to do well, and then, well, you'll end up like Erik and Sam.
Useless.
You talk about a disease, but a disease that still contributes. That's funny. Disease cannot contribute. It's a leech. And here's the big thing. I think that you talk about how it's really good to view the arts and the science, giving you both perspectives. Now, I can see how theoretically that could be a good in theory. But here's the problem with this program. The big problem. Any program that is willing to hire a guy like me to allow someone like me, an actor no less, to teach in this program, to educate. Well, if that's not useless, I don't know what is. So I'm willing to stand here and debase myself just to prove the point that arts and science students are useless. And the fact that both of you have taken my class, probably learned nothing. I said probably. Further proves this point. Now, in a few moments, Dr. Jones will come up to offer our concluding statements. But I think...
I'm so sorry.
Do we need to explain the rules again? I mean, I think this speaks to uselessness. Simple instructions. Creativity, right? Okay, don't get me started on how much time do I have?
About 40 seconds.
Fantastic. Creativity is the most useless thing. You sit around and what, you draw, you act, you perform. I mean, come on. Real problems need to be solved, and they're not going to be solved by creativity. They're going to be solved by looking at the cold, hard facts. That is what is useful. Things that cannot be argued.
Medical theater.
God bless you. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I mostly thought that Simon.
Okay, all right. Hartley, creativity. I believe there are plenty of problems that we can solve with creativity. For instance, the issue of not being able to have a blanket on your body at the same time as watching television. Snuggie has solved a creative solution to being cold while holding a baby. And you insult us you debate us for being the underbelly of society, for addressing the underbelly of society. That is to say, wimps and I'm sure other things we talked about. I can't remember. But that is a useful thing. We need to be able to face our darkness. We need to be able to face what is wrong with us in order to grow. That is something that we need to do. That's all about the powerful table pounding I've got in me, but I thought. And you say that the program is useless for hiring you. I won't contest you on that. But we're not talking about the usefulness of the program. We're talking about the usefulness of the students. So, good point.
That's how you rouse.
Quiet confidence.
You say, speaking of rousing the crowd, you say there's no use to going slow, that it's better to get places quick. I think there are a lot of people in this room who would disagree with that. I'm just saying. Dr. Jones, you say that we're a disease. I would say that there's a lot of value to disease. Actually, not long term, but if we're a disease, our immune system is going to be able to identify the disease and then later be able to address it. And so disease can be useful in that it can help identify problems. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Sorry. The level of their usefulness in discussing things, if only to help us see what is truly beautiful. So here I am, Hartley, you degraded yourself, well, you were up here, well, I'm kind of great at that too, so you can play at this game. I am also disgusting. Many of you are beautiful. Most of you even. I don't want to say all, that's getting a little crazy. Percentage-wise, it's pretty good. Pardon me? Okay, that's fine. Hey Eric, do you have any points?
Oh, well, I would just say, I just like to point out the fact, may I, Sam?
Yeah,
Hartley was talking about this. He was saying, well, and Sam addressed this pretty efficiently. She said, well, look, we're not talking about the efficiency of the program. We're talking about the students. But let's just say that that was actually logically coherent. Hartley, no, not Sam's point. No, Hartley's point. Of course, Sam and I are partners. Okay. No, but let's just assume that Hartley's point was coherent, and that hiring a professor negates the program. Well, Hartley, you were hired by the house side program to begin with. I think most people would agree that they're incompetent and useless. That doesn't affect us. I mean, it's besides the point. Anyway, yeah. Well, we're just saying. So either way, even if that was logically coherent, we don't think it addresses the art side issue. But it isn't, so it's beside the point.
Yeah.
We just wanted to point that out to you all. Was there anything else we wanted to say, Sam?
Oh, I don't know. I could just chat with you guys for a bit if you want. Promote good relationships, community.
Love?
All of those things.
Well, look, there's nothing else really to say. I think at this point we've won the case significantly. If we hear anything
Erik,
worth talking about, we're
out of time.
We're out of time, Chris. Well, you could have let me finish this. I was building up to something.
Okay, so now that we move to the next portion, again, this is kind of the freestyle section, so just anything goes, jump in when you want. You're not going to be timed quite as rigorously as you were for the last half hour or so, but try to keep your points under about 40 seconds, so whoever wants to begin, go for it.
We go to the professors.
Not all at once.
Okay, so Erik, you bring up the idea of the importance of community.
Of course.
And love.
Yeah.
Do you know who else called those values community? The communists. And would you call communism a useful system?
You would, though.
Well,
Says who?
Since you in your previous points. You were talking about our parliament and how it's, even though it's fair and democratic, it gets nowhere. And whereas I think you would argue that communism is actually very useful and that it gets stuff done.
you talked about the value of, which we think is an issue anyway. So talking about the value of dictatorship. This is something I wanted to bring up earlier. I hate to go out on a tangent, but what we were trying to say is that sure, dictatorships get things done, but it's not always the best decision. We would rather have the arts and sciences, a slower decision that's more satisfying and accomplishes more than a short, quick decision that ruins, that just falls below your expectations. I think that's a valuable thing, to have the longer
I mean, the fact that we're gonna go to innuendo.
I was talking about democracy versus dictatorship. I don't know what you're suggesting.
As am I, the innuendo of democracy and dictatorship.
Okay, well, I was confronting it. I was debating it. It's a serious problem we've got to resolve in this debate, Hartley. Let's not size.
Okay, Erik, yeah. Dr. Jones.
We've heard a little, perhaps a little too much, about happiness and enjoyment in dealing with emotion. And I'd like to expand a little bit, if I may, upon an adjective that I used earlier on when describing this arts side disease, this ditheritis, as I would call it. I said it was an insidious disease. Insidious because it brings with it a certain degree of pleasure, even as it harms. And what I meant by that is that it actually makes those who are victim to it feel good. They become deluded. And so they do not realize that there is something wrong with them. And that is what I meant by the insidious nature of this disease. I will say no more.
We'd just like to ask a question for Dr. Jones.
Insidious.
Insidious? Okay. Dr. Jones, you sound a lot like a prohibitionist when you talk about that. I mean, alcohol harms people to a certain degree, but I think most people would agree it's a net gain. It provides a net gain.
You yourself said winemakers were useful twice, even.
Twice?
Well, thank you for making my point for me. That's very good. Yes, I mean, the lotus eaters stuffing lotus leaves down their throats day after day, they very happy indeed. Very happy indeed. But they were totally useless, weren't they? I mean, useless is the only word I can use of them. The lotus eaters. Art size. Are lotus eaters.
Well, I mean, I'm saying we both like our green vegetables as much as the next guy. But I don't know if this is really addressed our case at all. I mean, we've heard, yes, so art sci students have a disease, and they're useless because they like pleasure. But they didn't address our material about, yes, art sci's have all these qualities, but they're still productive and contribute, for instance, on campus and things like that. I mean, these contributions are tangible. We can see them. We can see what arts and science students are contributing. And yeah, for all intents and purposes, you can argue that they're pleasure seekers and debauchery is their middle name. But I mean, still they're achieving some good. They're being productive while still seeking pleasure. I mean, is there not clearly a balance there?
See, this is delusion talking. This is the problem. This is why this disease is so difficult to eradicate. Because I will come back to it in my closing.
Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with, you seem to be arguing very vehemently that happiness is not useful, whereas what is use? I mean, is there any use to spending time at all if you're not happy about it at all? I mean, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, this is going to be a terrible, awful day. Gosh, better go build a castle or something, though. I mean, I'll have this castle, but will I be happy in it? I mean, what value is there in a castle if I'm not happy about it? Write that down.
You know, Sam, I think I can diagnose this disease we have.
Oh, really?
I'm going to call it winning the debateosis. It's a condition. It's a condition only art size can have. Students. I stipulate students. We do have a disease. It's called winning the debateosis.
Got it bad.
It's not anything good for us. I'm telling you. The symptoms are severe. It could be terminal.
Let me say, Mr. Moderator, that winning the debate is really of concern to Jafine and myself. Our concern is to rescue art size everywhere, not just here, but the world over. Because there are art size beyond this room. But our concern, our objective, is to rescue them from, I will say more later in my
Well, I'm happy that we're serving you the purpose, that's to say being useful, of making you feel noble, despite that nobility being completely imagined.
I think that's a delusion in itself. I think we have a case of a delusion of saving people from a delusion. You didn't even hurt my head, but it's a complex delusion here. I think we're not delusional. We accept that we do have thought, that inevitably we provide some utilitarian.
But that is interesting. When I hear someone say, I am not deluded, it's like hearing someone say, I'm not paranoid.
Yeah, it adds more fuel to the fire.
Well, I mean, I'm not a witch either. But does me saying this make you think I am? Maybe try holding me underwater for, well, okay, please don't. Okay, we're gonna just stray from this, guys.
Someone get a duck.
So,
No, sorry.
so you offered them something and then you took it away.
I was just looking out for myself, really. I think there are better ways for me to go than being burned at the stake.
Right.
This expression, looking after myself, an interesting one. Because it's a point I haven't raised yet, but I'll raise it now. In a way, being an outside, belonging to an outside community is in fact a rather self-indulgent. I don't want to choose between this and that. And so I will seek refuge in an outside community where I don't have to choose. I can have my cake and eat it as well.
And it's delicious.
So it is in a sense self-indulgent. I think that is at the root of why we are hearing so much about pleasure and happiness and arousal. It seems to be the keynotes of their conception of outside life.
I agree, because if you do only things that make you happy,
I'm glad you agree.
what gets done? Right? I mean, if I were to wake up and say, what makes me happy? Not going into work. Then
I'm fine.
well, yeah, the only thing that makes me happy, I'm useless. So you're saying that you're seeking out pleasure, you're seeking out happiness, which by the very definition is useless.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've been to, most people, if it's not an 8:30, okay, pretend it's not an 8:30 class, pretty much most art size still manage to get up and attend class while seeking pleasure after hours. I mean, it's what you do past 5 is your own business. But I'm saying is that it's not like you'd have to show how art size aren't being productive, and I think that's sort of self-evident that they are productive. They are producing things. They are contributing actively to not only the university, but we contend in the long run provide some sort of social good. So we think, yeah, you can have all the pleasure you want, but I still think I don't think art science students are that naive as to think that they can't draw the line between pleasure and getting work done. Yeah.
I think it's evidenced every day by the small deluge of emails I receive inviting me to activist events. I mean, okay, it is a good thing. I like knowing about these things. Please send me all the emails you want. But obviously we're involved outside of the classroom. Obviously we're involved in things that are doing productive things for other people, I may add. Is Asha here? She says a lot of things about water.
That provides a significant social good, though. I mean, water issues are a big problem. Ask Andrew; he'll tell you.
I will.
Andrew wrote his inquiry papers on water, so he'll tell you that's an issue. We think that's a form of acting. It provides a social good. That art sides are involved with that sort of thing. Sure, they get things done when they're not busy doing that, but they're still accomplishing something, and we think that's clear. It's self-evident. You have to show there's no tangible product of art science work.
Well, let's not get too philosophical. We need to talk about the contributions that art size make qua art size, not qua citizens, but qua art size. So many of the activities to which you refer, in which art size are indeed involved, they are involved in them qua citizens of the land, not qua art size. Would you agree? Yes, I would agree.
Well, I mean, in the example of the silhouette, I mean, I would say that
Arbitrarily.
a huge over, what is it? You tell me, 3/4?
There's like 10 of us.
There's like 10 of them, but there's one non-art site?
Okay, well,
2? Well, you tell me.
7, I think.
7. Okay, well, that doesn't prove my point. But what we're saying is that, first of all, I don't actually think it's on us to prove that art signs have some sort of special qualities that nobody else has, right? We're just saying whether or not they have a contribution. But to say that people do it not because they're art size, I mean, that's besides the point. We're not talking about whether the art side program instills a certain value set which makes you more likely to do something. We're saying arts and science students do these sort of things. So as being arts and science students and being useful people, then they are useful arts and science students. Hence, arts and science students are useful.
Have you read the silhouette?
I happen to write an article for it this week, so.
I mean, if we're clutching at straws here, folks. When you're going to the silhouette, talk about the useful contribution that arts and science students make. I mean, I think you're proving our point. You might as well be pulling up a chair over here.
No. I like to think, it provides a fairly significant service for the school. I mean, I want to know that a new booster juice is opening, right? I think it's an essential information that I know this. And it's provided to me throughout the silhouette. It's information that, yes, it's not groundbreaking news, because, I'm sorry, McMaster campus is not that exciting. It is for us, but I mean, on the grand scheme of things, it's not, it's not the Middle East or something in terms of. No. In terms of its significance, in terms of its but in terms of its significance as on a global scale.
So to be clear, what you're determining as useful information is where you can get your blended smoothies?
No. Perhaps just let me finish. What I'm saying is that there are certain places or situations, right? In a grander context, McMaster does not, or news at McMaster doesn't have a grand context. But on campus, for people who go beyond knowledge, it's not to say essential, but it's useful, very useful. And by having it in one source that can contribute, and everybody can read and understand, we think that's a fairly significant use to the student. To the student body, we think that's useful.
All right, Eric, I'm going to have to stop you there. That brings an end to the 15 minutes of this portion of our debate. So now we'll move to concluding statements. We'll start with Erik and Sam. You guys have 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay then. I guess so. Okay, part 2. I'm going to pull this up again because I like it. Sure. It makes me feel in charge. Delusions of grandeur, I know. Okay, so we came up here and we told you we had to prove essentially 2 things to win, right? We had to say, first of all, we basically had to show you, and we think we did, that even before you objectively define usefulness, as essentially the professors have, you have to realize that it's difficult to do that to begin with. That even if you're going to define usefulness, it has to be subjective. And if it is indeed subjective, it's impossible to show that every subjective definition of use equals every definition being useless. We think we sufficiently proved that. At the same time, we think we showed you, even if there is an objective definition, if for all intents and purposes, you can say that that usefulness is defined by your contribution to society as a whole, arts and science students still do that. Whether or not you define the society as on campus or off campus is up to you. But we think that arts and science students provide a social good on campus, and when they leave campus, we think we've shown you they can provide it as well. Hartley, read it. It's enlightening material.
Better than this?
It is. Thank you for conceding our point. It's very beneficial. I never said that what I was saying was any value. I was saying that arts and science students as a whole have value. So sure, I might be diseased and useless as an individual, but I think on the whole, arts and science students do have provided social good. You're reading it right now. So, what did we tell you? We told you first, as I already said, they provide tangible good through their contributions on and off campus, right? And then Sam talked about how even if it's not a tangible contribution, that you can tally up arts and science students involved on campus as the MSU president, on the MSU exec, on the silhouette, blah, 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 all these contributions, right? Even if you can't tally them up, there's